Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to you all joining us this morning, coming to you live from a wet and rainy Sydney. I'm Tanya Arlington, Event Director at Workplace Wellness Festival, and today we are bringing you a panel discussion on how organisations such as Linfox, Bupa and Queensland Police led their people during COVID-19, how they helped them navigate through challenges and how they've been caring for their health and well-being along the way. The webinar will go for approximately 40 minutes, which will be followed by a Q&A session. You'll notice on the right-hand side of your screen that there is a chat section. Feel free to say hi and comment during the discussion. And then in the Q&A chat, you'll be able to put forward any questions you have for the session. First up to the stage, I'd like to introduce Bupa's Head of Health and Wellbeing, Inga Vilkins, who will be introducing the panelists and also moderating the discussion today. Welcome, Inga.
Good morning, Tanya, and hello.
How are you today?
Very well, thank you.
Good. It's wonderful to have you back on stage with us again this year, and really looking forward to hearing about updates on how you and your teams have been navigating the last 12 months.
Yes, I'm very excited about today's discussion. It's great to see so many people brought together to discuss such an important topic around tackling burnout and protecting people's well-being. And so I'm delighted to introduce...
Sorry, just before you introduce the panelists, your camera seems to be off.
I might need to come back in, Tanya.
Okay, or you could, if you, refresh your screen, that could also help.
Sure.
All right, we'll just wait for Inga to refresh. She'll be joining us in a minute. And a reminder that our main event, Workplace Wellness Festival 2021, will be coming to you live here on this stage on the 22nd and 23rd of June. We have over 100 speakers across 6 conference tracks, so don't miss out and register as soon as possible for you and your teams. Inga is back and still having issue with some video, so we'll just wait for Inga to come back in. Yeah, so if you haven't registered for you and your teams, it's going to be an action-packed program. You can head to the website where you'll be able to see some of the topics that we'll be bringing. But it's a not-to-be-missed event, particularly in taking stock on how everyone's been doing to keep their teams well over the last 12 months of COVID life. And here is Inga. Lovely to see you, Inga.
Thanks, Tanya. There's nothing like a bumpy start to a webinar. Issues with technology, but we are here, and I am excited to see everyone and very excited about this topic. So I'm delighted.
I'll leave you to it, Inga, to introduce everyone. See you soon.
So I'm delighted to introduce today's panelists. Mark Dean, founder and CEO of Masse. Nesci, head of psychological health and safety at Bupa. Holly Hoskins, dietitian and health coach within the health, safety and wellbeing team at Queensland Police. And Marian Merrigan, national health and safety manager at Linfox. So why is the topic of burnout so important? It's because of what our people are feeling right now. It's not a new issue, it's just one we're struggling to manage. A recent survey conducted by Flexwork found that 75% of people have experienced burnout at work, with 40% saying it was COVID that tipped them over the edge. And although that we're blessed to live in a country that is largely COVID-free, the repercussions of this pandemic are ongoing. We're still feeling the pressure. The challenge of doing more with less, the effects of recurring lockdowns, fears about the effectiveness of the vaccination and the bleak economic outlook are all taking a toll on our mental well-being. Many people are continuing to suffer with poor mental health, and many more will face new mental health challenges into the future. Now is the time to think about proactive and sustainable strategies to address burnout. It's more than just supporting the individual, it's about making systemic changes to create a healthier work environment. So in today's session, we're going to look to the experience of our frontline workers during COVID to understand the effects of sustained stress and pressure. And from their stories, we can see how organisations pivoted and adapted and take their lessons to use with our own people. And we're going to start by hearing from Linfox. Hi, Marian. hear about what's been happening at Linfox over the last couple of months.
Good morning, Inga. It's certainly been a challenging time, but at the same time, we've had some really good, exciting initiatives that have been rolled out. So I'll just mention something about Linfox. So Linfox was founded in 1956, and it all started, as you probably know, the story of Lindsay Fox with one truck. He delivered soft drinks in summer and fuel in winter, and it's certainly the same sort of I would say resources that we have had moving across the country. So in such a big organisation delivering that, yes, we've certainly had our challenges, but certainly some wins that we'd like to share with you today.
Great, thanks, Marian. And I know that some of you guys were responsible for keeping our toilet paper stock up to date throughout the pandemic. So we are truly thankful for that.
Our pleasure. It was very challenging.
So I can imagine, yeah, definitely. So I can imagine some long, tiresome days for you guys out on the road. How is sort of fatigue and burnout presented across your workforce?
Yeah, look, the fatigue was a huge challenging factor, and not from the aspect so much. We have our regulations in place. We have our policies and procedures that ensure that we don't work excessive hours. But at the same time, the stress of COVID and the pressures around families of people losing work maybe in the same household, whilst our employees were still employed, the pressures at home were quite significant. So we had to look at doing things very differently. And whilst sleep so the area I look after is the health and wellbeing, and sleep and fatigue is obviously quite important and detrimental to how we operate every day. So rather than just look at sleep strategies, there was a real focus around refuel, recharge, and also rest. So the sleep strategies are rest, but the refuel around nutrition advice and what we can do, but not just focusing on the individual, but focusing on the household.
Great, thanks, Marian. And I really like that holistic approach. I'm going to hear a lot more about that, about how we're looking at both physical and mental, and most importantly, social factors as well that have really positively impacted individuals. I'd love to hear from Chanel and what the experience has been at Bupa.
Thanks, Inga. And absolutely, I think last year we were really appreciative of a number of foundations that we had at Bupa around flexible work arrangements and looking after ourselves, and really giving our employees across our workforce and all of our different frontline businesses the education and the knowledge required to understand why that's so important. And then I look at the impacts of what we went through last year, which was absolutely, I think, took everyone by surprise, a crisis that we didn't really know what was coming and how long it would last for. Definitely tested what we had in place and has absolutely reformed what we currently have and what we aim to have in the future, to be able to manage things like this, which hopefully won't happen to that extent again. But I guess we know that now we don't know what is likely to impact our people. So when it comes to burnout and the amount that we had to all step up in our roles to really manage what was happening for the sake of our residents and our customers, I think that we're definitely still seeing the impacts now, and we've got a lot more in place to ensure that people are educated around burnout prevention, but also burnout management, because as you mentioned, we are in that place still. It's been a number of months since I think we're in the thick of it, but we are still seeing our people impacted by what happened, the fear of what happened and potentially happening again, and maybe not feeling up to being able to manage it again if it were to happen. So we really need to be aware of that. And when it comes to fatigue, we absolutely have improved the systems we have in place, the types of risk management approach that we have for that, just to ensure that our people are better prepared for our new business as usual. But also if anything like this were to occur, I do feel that we've definitely taken what we had, which was a really great approach to health and care and flexible work arrangements, and taken that to the next level to make sure that our people are really set up for success in times of crisis and in our new world which we live in now.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Chanel. And I know that we're going to talk more about, how to build some of those existing sort of strategies and resources and the like. Quite a diverse organisation. For those that don't know, we have people, in our call centres, retail stores, right through to aged care homes. So would you say that the challenges varied quite a lot across the organisation, and that was quite a challenge to look after, be it 24,000 people, Chanel?
Absolutely. I think we can't go past the fact that what our aged care frontline had to face and endure throughout such a stressful time, especially in Victoria where we had outbreak homes. I think that they, what they did for our residents, what they did for us as an organisation was absolutely just remarkable. We had while we're trying to run a service, while we're trying to care for our people and our residents in our homes, we also had people that couldn't come into the home because of isolation restrictions and the staffing concerns of that, and the cycle of fatigue, the cycle of burnout was just, it was relentless for a period of time, and some homes were obviously impacted more than others. But credit to the people who had to go through that, because that was the most challenging, and a 24/7 operation with absolutely no reprieve, and also with our most vulnerable people in that society as well, and responsible for their lives. So I think that was definitely our biggest challenge. At the same time, when we're looking at some of our other areas of the organisation, our health services, we've got dental, we've got our Bupa medical visa services. So we had a lot of people working with people coming in from overseas, and that obviously brings some anxiety and some stress to their roles, especially when we didn't know much about it in the very, very beginning. And then we also have our health insurance contact centre employees who traditionally were in a very controlled environment in the office, not really having that ability to work from home. And then within days, we were all working from home, which was in some cases quite a positive change for some. But we also need to understand that working from home and that flexibility doesn't quite suit everyone. So adjusting our management styles, adjusting our leadership, adjusting our support was absolutely pivotal to make sure that transition was successful and that we cared for our people throughout that time.
Amazing. So I'd love to hear from you, Holly. Another large organisation, the police force are always on, but at this time, must have felt that additional pressure because of the pandemic. So I'd love to hear about what's been happening across Queensland Police most recently.
Thank you. I think we echo a lot of what Chanel said about the large dispersed organisation. In the Queensland Police, we do have the frontline officers all the way up to, the office-based officers. Then we have the admin, and then we have people in call centres. So very much similar, that it was business as usual. Plus, we add on this massive COVID event, which really stretched our organisation to its absolute limits. They're having trouble filling positions. Then you've got sick leave. So Wellbeing was a really big thing that we had to, not only push out to get everyone aware, but really change it to what was going on. So we kind of, with it all, we really wanted just everyone to bring back the basics, and we really drove control what you can control. And we put that down to, the 4 pillars of health, and really sleep, nutrition, exercise, and breath, and, ways in which you can implement that wherever you are, because people were being taken to go on border control. So they weren't in their homes, they weren't with their natural routine. So we really wanted to, put it back to simple things that you can do to really benefit your health. And so I think we'll go into a bit later some of the initiatives, but we really drove the, know your numbers to see where you're at, because things are changing. And as long as you're aware of your health, and if you are, the early signs of burnout and fatigue, which unfortunately, saying, prevent burnout was not good enough, because that was unfortunately not easy to do because of the way in which the organised changed. So yeah, we've definitely had that same difficult nature of trying to get that message off to 15,500 people across the state. But one of the best things that happened to us in COVID is the launch of Workplace, which is the online platform like Facebook for the organisation. So that was really, that actually took off really well. So it was a really good platform where we could help get that information across no matter where everyone was.
Great, thanks, Holly. So, Mark, hearing that burnout is prevalent across the majority of organisations and teams right now, can you share with us what the research is telling us about the importance of protecting employees from burnout and fatigue?
Absolutely. Thanks, Inga. Well, I think it's always helpful to start with this question of what is it that we're actually dealing with? And so there's been some interesting research that distinguishes burnout as a syndrome or a state of dis-ease organisationally and in the workplace context from, broadly speaking, exhaustion. And so the actual definition of burnout is helpful to start with, because when we break down the three components, we can actually start to formulate some prevention and sort of early or active intervention-based responses. And so the International Classification of Diseases under the World Health Organization defines burnout as a syndrome. It's not actually clinically recognized as an illness. But the three components are that an individual experiences a pretty significant depletion in energy. That's kind of chronic, and we are talking about chronic workplace stress that hasn't been necessarily successfully managed. So we're talking about a chronic depletion in energy. So we start to look at interventions that help to replenish energy and to pre-stock on energy, if you like. And I think the pandemic, and I am very, very sympathetic to the experiences of frontline workers in particular. You just couldn't predict. And so a self-compassionate approach at the organisational level is really important. So I want to preface what I'm saying with that, which is effectively, if we think about the need to pre-stock on energy for anything that might occur, it's a little bit like having a bit of a gap in your diary in your day where you can just have a bit of a buffer rather than think I can go from one energy depleting event to another. The second thing is that there needs to be, and this is a big distinguishing feature from say, just broadly speaking, exhaustion, a significant sense of, or noticeable sense of distancing that the individual experiences between themselves and their job, or a bit of cynicism that's noticeable about their job. So this kind of speaks to me of a lack of connection with a meaning or purpose, or perhaps something to do with, and this is where I think the gap comes in that we can address with strategies, not feeling connected. We know that courses and programs that help and behaviours that help build trust in an organisation help increase oxytocin levels quite often, which is often called the love drug. And that's a wonderful protective factor that bonds people together. And so I think there are some answers within that. What are we doing to increase trust and bond people together as a protective factor that helps bridge that gap that often happens when people feel disconnected or distanced from their job, one of the factors of burnout. And so the third one is actually around what is referred to as self-efficacy or efficacy, which you can think of in terms of productivity. And I think one of the major steps that organisations can take, which is something I'm really pleased to hear that our speakers today are talking about in terms of their workforces, is that appreciation of what they are achieving. That acknowledgement that people are actually setting goals each day and showing up and working on strategies and taking action, but it feels to them like they're not. So measuring what people are doing and playing that back to them with some positive reward, I think, is a huge factor. And just finally, I want to mention some research that was done and has been validated in a few ways back in 2017. Seems like a really long time ago now, doesn't it? That compared physical exercise-based therapeutic interventions for burnout with physical exercise plus cognitive therapy-based approaches, so helping people to understand what their thoughts are telling them, like I'm not achieving anything, or I'm so tired and therefore I'm not any good at what I do, which is a negative reinforcing cycle with mindfulness-based techniques. So exercise, CBT and mindfulness seem to be a magical combination for treating burnout, for helping people to recover more quickly, quite effective. And so organisationally, sponsorship of programs that are multimodal, that cover the full spectrum of health, I think have been proven to be the most effective.
Great. And we've seen some, really good examples of that across different organisations, including Queensland Police. Holly, would love to hear a bit more about Take Control, Know Your Numbers campaign that was really about building self-awareness and self-control for individuals.
Yeah, so we really just in this time wanted to go, obviously there's a lot of reaction to health, but we really wanted to build that prevention. And with the police, being in that organisation, you're already at an elevated risk of diabetes, mental health disorders, chronic disease compared to a civilian. And so we really wanted people to be aware of where they're at before, they crash and burn. So we partnered with Bupa, and our first initiative here was to we delivered 200 health kiosks. So in the health kiosk, it had a blood pressure machine and a waist circumference and a QR code, which delivered you information on what your numbers meant. And so we put them across the state to really encourage people to use them and use the blood pressure machine as well as a place where they can hold their data. And this was really successful. We got some amazing feedback and initiatives and some amazing feedback and compliments from what people were learning, especially the police love to use them to differentiate their blood pressure between normal times and high stress times and how it was changing. And then to add to that, we delivered 4 CSU machines as well. So these are a bit of a bigger, you might see them in chemists across 4 locations. And we got that data, which was really powerful to see where we as an organisation were at. And, then it helped us target our initiatives to be a bit more direct and to places that were at need. One of the really big ones is blood pressure, in which we, as an organisation, seem to be at a really high risk. So a lot of our initiatives now are going around that and, and educating and helping the employees of the organisation to know what that means and what they can do to decrease or maintain or support with that with the GPs and doctors. So that was really great. And then we've also implemented our chronic disease risk assessment tool. So that helped people know their risk of chronic disease, which is also giving us that internal data, which has been really powerful. So that was really the first initiative we did that came back as really successful, especially with the good news stories that came with it, with the employees saying how great it was for them to know that. And then also we added that every QPS employee could have a free blood test once every 2 years. So we really gave that kind of holistic inside and outside what's going on, so people are aware of where they were at.
That's great, Holly, and providing that opportunity to regularly check in and understand their health status, but most importantly, understand, what support might be more broadly available. I think it's really great to be able to connect into EAP or, other programs that are going on to continue that journey for individuals. So I'd love to continue the thought around checking in with employees. And Marian, I know that this was one key initiative for Linfox as well, but you were taking more the approach around support and social connection with some of the check-ins you were making.
Yeah, that's right, Inga. Very similar to just reflecting what Mark had said and also Holly. It was really about the holistic approach. We introduced a couple of different things. We had a program, but the one in particular around not just EAP and talking about the extensive services, because we have services also that support around for domestic violence, helplines. We had support around financial free assistance in that space. But the one thing that was quite effective was our wellbeing check-ins. So because we had just trained up numerous mental health first aiders at different locations, and I think we've got 150 locations in Australia alone currently, to have them recognise the signs and symptoms and then be able to speak to that employee and say, hey, do you think, we can organise a wellbeing check-in? And that came from a psychologist. And those conversations, some have been as simple as 5 minutes to check in how they're going at home. So rather than it be a workplace approach, it was really about a whole person approach and how are you being affected in these times? How's your family been affected? And I think the impact of the care relationship and an authentic connection to support people was quite significant. So the feedback we received on that was great. We received the baseline data, which, similar to Holly, I agree with you, it's very powerful to receive that and know these are true statistics about our people, and then being able to target those programs and tailor them simplistically to, okay, what's going to be our proactive approach from this moment on now that we have the data. So, sorry.
That's all right, Marian. I know that your leaders were also really proactive in terms of reaching out to their team. That just created that overall supportive culture. Is there sort of any examples around that you can share?
Sure. So it was our senior managers and our CEO that took the lead on the wellbeing check-ins first. So I think that was that speaks volumes in an organisation, that it wasn't just CEOs talking about it. They were actually doing their own check-ins with their direct reports, and therefore from presidents of different business units onto our senior leadership team, to our team leaders, to people on the floor. And it didn't matter. It wasn't about hierarchy. It was about, hey, I noticed this person looked a little bit dishevelled today. I noticed this person was a little bit quieter, or someone was actually even more outspoken because of the amount of tension that was occurring in our community and our nation at the time and globally. We actually had some people that were angry. So being able to recognise that rather than go down a disciplinary action, I think our leadership took the stance of, I actually noticed that's really out of their character. What can we do? So that's where those wellbeing check-ins were really beneficial. And then we looked at also an additional program that it just leveraged off. I jumped back on the call, and I'm sorry, my internet completely went down before, where Mark had talked about, that the chemicals that increase that happiness to your brain. So we really focused on the endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and the oxytocin that releases. It moves you from that mental health continuum from a red zone into the green zone just by doing acts around connection, whether it be designed, we had little activities around mindfulness, whether it had encouraging people to move. So whilst our people were so disconnected physically, they hadn't been more connected socially. So the social connection actually improved, which was quite remarkable in that space. And I think our biggest learning from these challenges and the challenging times was keep it simple. We look into so much data and research, and we want to do something that's big and extravagant. But it was a simple task of even reaching out to our emergency services frontline workers, although we were frontline too, to say thank you. That release of the oxytocin and serotonin, doing acts of kindness, and the emphasis around team. Because everyone has a good day in a team on any given day, on a game day, and other people's have bad days. But when you're a part of a team, if you're having a bad day, knowing that your colleague's going to pick up that slack for you and support you through it, that emphasis around stability, teamwork, connection, it was quite remarkable. And it was a learning that we now look at and think, wow, this is something that can support the community maybe, and not just our own people. So it was just a nice place to be in, to see our CEOs, to our senior leaders, to our frontline leaders. But I think what was significant is there was this ripple effect for peer-to-peer when you have that kind of leadership in place.
And we know leadership is so important through, challenging times such as this, trying to keep that social connection and that support going. And Mark, I'd like to sort of ask you your thoughts around what are some of the skills we need to be developing within our leaders to have maybe those difficult, challenging, and sometimes emotionally burdensome conversations with team members right now. How is training and skill building sort of changing or evolving because of this crisis?
That's a great question, Inga. Thank you. And I think the first thing to recognise is that, and picking up on some of the threads that Holly and Marian have been talking about as well, is that conversations about mental health, as do conversations about broader health, help build insight. And insight from an individual wellbeing perspective is such an important starting point. And it's such a wonderful thread to hear about what both Queensland Police and Linfox have been doing on these fronts. In terms of helping people to have the conversations, the first thing is, I think, to help leaders to recognise we are all human, and one of our coping strategies for dealing with difficult situations or situations where we feel the fear of perhaps I might not know what I'm doing here, or perhaps I might mess this up, is to avoid. And so understanding avoidance as a normal human coping strategy is a helpful starting point. And then to address the key causes of avoidance when it's maladaptive, like avoiding a conversation with somebody whom you think might be struggling. And so typically people would say, I didn't have the conversation because I didn't know how to. I actually didn't know what to say. That's a big one. And another one in various forms is, I thought I might make it worse or mess it up or increase the risk by having this conversation. And so to dispel those myths, if you like, we really focus on building skills and confidence, giving people the license. And in many respects, it can also be about helping leaders and managers to understand this is actually a workplace responsibility too. It's not optional to actually look out for health and safety, and that includes mental health. And then how do I have a conversation? What would I do to prepare for that conversation? And typically, as I think we've been talking about, and Marian has certainly referenced as a success in her workplace, we're looking at what signs would you spot that somebody might be struggling? What are the early warning signs? Making a note of those and being able to have a conversation that looks like, I'm concerned about your well-being because you seemed really tired lately. Then moving on to the conversation about what we could do in terms of the workplace. Is there something at work contributing? How are your energy levels going? What support do you need? And being prepared for different reactions as well, because we know sometimes when people are fearful, perhaps just struggling generally, we can get, and this is a very, very technical term, a little bit cranky. And it's a very similar, part of our brains that regulates, in fact, it's the same part of the brain that regulates fear, that also produces our secondary anger responses when we're fearful or when we're anxious. So it's very normal. And this is something that we can help managers and leaders to understand, to exercise some compassion, a bit of self-regulation in terms of how we respond, and to support people through that rather than moving into a punitive mode. So there are a few tips, and always following up, not putting ourselves under so much pressure to get a result from one conversation, that it's an ongoing, regular conversation we have about well-being that's typically and preferably separated out from conversations about workload or performance, definitely separating that out from a performance chat.
Thanks, Mark. And I know, Chanel, that Bupa has done a lot in the space of developing resources to support leaders and further training for our frontline staff. Love to hear a bit more about that and any other strategies, Bupa as an organisation has done to really address this risk that is burnout and fatigue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest measures of success and support is seeing our very executive leaders get on board with this agenda, and acknowledging from the very top how hard it is at the moment and how hard it was throughout 2020. So I guess having that acknowledgement helps draw that connection to the workplace, helps our people say our leaders actually understand what we're going through and they care about what we're going through, rather than having that more so removed approach to we're doing our role as leaders to protect our people, but we're not showing them actively that we understand what's happening. So having really present, very, very senior leaders, whether that be via our communication channels or actually in some of the areas that were deeply impacted. We started with that. We made sure that that was really clear, that our senior leaders absolutely want this on the agenda more so than ever before. And that's probably one of the, positive things that came out of this. I have seen a huge shift in how engaged our execs are, how engaged everyone is around making sure that our people are well, because I think everyone realised that no one's immune to mental health concerns, mental illness, vulnerabilities, especially in the face of a global crisis. And I, as well, what we did is we looked at what's going on in our community, what's going on in our society that we need to make sure that our people are aware of and prepared for. So, for example, we knowing that many people were under different types of pressures, we upskilled our leaders by ensuring that they had the mental health training and the understanding that Mark was explaining then, just around how do we manage these kind of concerns, how do we spot the signs, and we've done that for a number of years. But I guess this was an opportunity to potentially engage people that didn't necessarily see this as pivotal to their role before, and then at the same time increasing our skills around how do you respond to a suicide risk or a family domestic violence concern that's come up in the workplace, because all of these things directly, we saw it a lot in the media around an increase in support that people were reaching out for around family violence and the potential to see suicide rates increase in the next few years. And I think that preparing our people as much as we could with those skills was something that we needed to do. But at the same time, we are very much customer facing. We have a number of different customers that we deal with every day, and they're also impacted. So we rolled out customer and distress training for our health insurance employees so that they knew how to respond to people in a really safe way that may be calling up and telling us some really awful things that they're currently going through. So preparing everyone as much as we could with what was happening externally to our organisation was something that was front of mind. It's there now, it exists, which is amazing. Previously, we probably didn't even think about this. But we also saw things like customer aggression increase because of all that pressure that was going on externally, and we had to make sure that our people were really prepared for that and that our leaders were prepared to support our people through that. But I think all of that came from acknowledging and really deeply understanding what was happening so that we could quite quickly respond to it. And I've seen a lot of agility and a lot of flexibility in the way our whole organisation worked to make sure that we did that and made sure that those systems were in place to ensure that our people were ultimately physically and psychologically healthy and safe.
Thanks, Chanel. That's great, and so much activity going on. And before I sort of shift into talking about future state, I'd love to encourage our audience, everyone viewing at the moment, to start to log their questions in the Q&A channel, because we'll be moving that in a couple of minutes. But before we do, I'd love to ask Holly for you to maybe share some of your learnings from this recent season, and what would you take forward potentially into the next crisis, if next crisis?
Hopefully not, but obviously we know that these things now happen. One of the biggest learnings for us is, kind of Chanel touched on that, is the power of having, the team leaders in health and wellbeing, or having the hierarchy implement these initiatives from the top down and be involved in it. I'm sure everyone's aware of, if your boss is just not the vision of health and doesn't really care, and you're struggling, they're not approachable and they're not there for you when you need them because they're not mirroring those same values. So with the police being such a hierarchical and ranked organisation, we found that when you reached out to get these team leaders, we called them health and wellbeing champions, because we want those people to have those values and passion around that and be approachable for, our people to be like, to go up to for any troubles they have. So that took a long time to roll out because, as you know, we're really stretched geographically. But with Workplace, which was an awesome platform, those people, we have our Health Start group, which is my little branch team, and you see those people roll through who are really passionate about that. And so splitting that up and giving them the information to feed down to their people because they have that respect was really valuable. But now that we know those people, we know the kind of process to get those right leaders in that field is really strong. We just at the very start of COVID, we did a small health initiative where in a district, we got 10 people who had passions in health and wellbeing, and we led a health initiative through them. So each person had 10 people under them. So because I'm the only dietitian for 15,500 people, so we can't do too much one-on-one. We need to get that, just to facilitate these initiatives. But long story short, it was just the know your numbers. Obviously, with the Queensland Police, we have such a holistic help available: EAP, internal psychology, exercise scientists, dietitians. So know your numbers. We gave them the support and helped them over 6 months. And there was the biological age decrease, the waist circumference decrease, blood pressure decrease. Was remarkable, and there was a 26% decrease in sick days just over 6 months. So in a district, that's if you did that statewide, that's huge benefits, and that really came from having those leaders and people who respect them to really facilitate that information down. So I definitely take that in, probably just as business as usual, to really have those workplace champions to help facilitate any initiative. And secondly, would be to be a bit more direct and simple, like you said, Marian, because sometimes before COVID, we just had so much going on, and it can just get a bit lost and not as powerful, effective. And through COVID, we really just started to target the little things and the simple things that people can do to help control and let them know the support that was available. So definitely going forward, getting that data if you can somehow, and then doing more direct and tailored initiatives to areas to see that benefit is definitely a way that we will go down in the future as well. So yeah.
Great, thanks, Holly. And I think it's something that we all want to continue to leverage. The champions, the passionate people within our organisation, but also getting our leaders to really be the face of these particular initiatives and show and demonstrate that supportive culture moving forward. So Chanel, I might ask the same question of you. What are some of the learnings or strategies that you're going to take forward into the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of my biggest learnings, and especially doing a number of check-ins across the organisation this year just to see how people are going, is that it's not over, it's not finished. There's a number of people that have residual impacts based on what happened last year, as well as we know in some parts of the world things are really quite dire, and that's impacting some of our people who have family and friends and maybe separated from family as well, who can't get back to Australia. So I think for us, we're still on the journey. We're still on a very much wanting to consult with our people to see what they need, as well as continue to build what we've currently got in place to make it more effective, to make sure that we don't just go into we're finished with that now because we don't see as much as what is probably happening for our people. But in conversations that I've had with people that were deeply impacted at the time last year, that they're still quite fearful. They're still needing support. So it's about continuing to ask the question, how are you? What's happening? What can we do for you now? And just having those conversations still quite regularly with our people. We're also making sure that we have a number of different channels of consultation, thinking and in a way to conceptualise that, we are going to be doing an all-employee state of mental health survey, as well as a psychosocial risk component to that, just to understand what are our priority areas. We can't do it all all the time. Unfortunately, it would be ideal if we could, but every organisation has conflicting priorities and finite resources. So we completely acknowledge that. But what is meaningful for our people, and going out there and asking that is really, really important. And it might be completely different to what our findings would have been 12 months ago or 24 months ago. So just continuously asking what's needed, what are our priorities, and making sure that we acknowledge them. My area is obviously mental health, but I love hearing Holly talk about the physical wins that they've had with their workforce, and it's also connected. And being able to bring all of those components together under a wellbeing banner is really important. And we just hope to continue to do that and aligned with what our people are telling us that they need.
Thanks, Chanel. So I'd like to encourage the audience to post your questions. I know the panel are ready and waiting to answer them. So if you'd like to either post them in the chat or go over into the Q&A section and post them for us, that'd be great. Panel, I can't see any questions just yet. I'm not sure if you can. Whilst everyone is warming up and posting their questions, we might just continue this conversation around moving into the future. Mark, your thoughts on what does good workplace health look like over the next 6 months? What should we be aiming for?
Thanks, Inga. Well, I really like Chanel's recognition that, and it is such a, I keep coming back to this word, compassionate recognition, that people are still struggling. There are residual impacts, and people have their lives and personal residual effects that are very real, very current from the pandemic. And so this idea that we are still on this journey, I think, is a really important one. I also like the conversation about consultation. And, Chanel mentioned that Bupa's doing the psychological surveys, and at least asking the questions, even if we can't manage or tackle everything. One of the greatest risks, I think, to our mental health can be this idea, and this is often about that little voice in our heads that comes from the default mode network. What should I be doing more of? I'm not doing enough. And just to be a little bit gentler about that, to say we'll do what we can, we'll look for the highest priorities. That builds trust, interestingly, as well. When you consult with your workforce, that helps to build trust. And when you're reflecting back, this is what we've heard, we're going to try and do what we can. Really important. And then finally, I think just bringing that recovery and maintenance phase that so many of us are in now into the business as usual, so that loops back into our prevention strategy for the future. Bringing those learning experiences and those initiatives from a crisis point through to long-term business as usual, really, really good ideas.
And we've got a great question in the chat just around how do we convince organisations to see that investing in employee wellbeing and addressing burnout is not a cost, that there is impact on the organisation's performance and, most importantly, people's wellbeing more broadly. So Chanel, do you have any strategies around that? I know that you mentioned a survey to get a greater understanding of the risks and needs across the workplace. Are there anything else that you would suggest to demonstrate?
I think there's a lot of really great reports and initiatives and research that are coming out that can support us in our roles, and people who understand and advocate for well-being of employees and how that impacts an organisation. Although directly, when it comes to financial impact, it's not a workers' compensation type scheme where you can directly see your efforts coming through financial gain or financial cost prevention, essentially. I think what I've noticed, the Mental Health Productivity Commission report has some really, really excellent information in there that's quite recent, that has been helpful for us to be able to demonstrate this is some findings that are quite relevant to organisations, and not only going from a cost benefit perspective, but also just from a this is the right thing to do, and this is the types of benefits that organisations can gain from having psychologically safe workplaces, from having really strongly invested leaders who understand the benefits of having happy and well employees. It's about tackling it from a number of different avenues that essentially taps into different people's motivations, because some people might be motivated by cost benefits and return on investment, and some people might be more motivated by what are our social moral obligations as organisations to actually do better in this space. And it's really coming out now that as a community, for us to really gain traction, our institutions, our workplaces, our unis, our schools, we need to be doing more to help our society in general. It's not just about individuals anymore. And I think that that's definitely something that I'm seeing come through. On the other side of that, it's also our obligation. So where we're seeing a lot more guidance coming out, we're seeing our regulators become more prescriptive around what is our obligation as employers to protect not only the physical health, but the mental health of our employees. Maybe we need to go in with a little bit of a harder line and say, well, this isn't a nice thing to do anymore. It's actually becoming a lot more stringent, a lot more regulated, and we won't be compliant if we don't meet the needs that we're being consistently and increasingly told that we have a responsibility for, which absolutely our organisations do. So there's a few different strategies that I would suggest.
Definitely. And I think gathering that data, so we heard from both Holly and Marian around the importance of gathering the insights, and Chanel, you said that we're on that journey as well at Bupa. And there's numerous different tools out there, Holly, that you leverage some of the Bupa services, the CSU machines to be able to gather that. Marian, was there any particular tools that you use to be able to understand the health needs and risks of your people?
Yeah, so when we used a number of different tools, we looked at the research, we looked at what the media was saying and where they were directing it, for whether it be Beyond Blue or Lifeline. But the one thing I will say about the media is be sure to check your facts, because it's easy to get caught up in that scenario and have people off the floor and talking about the same thing. So myth busting was something that was really important for us during that time. So what we did do, though, is we took our pre-surveys prior to the program that we launched last year in the middle of the program, and we really tore it apart at the conclusion of the program. We also had, we have a program that's called also Stop for Safety, and we focused on a real health and wellbeing spin in that safety scenario, because whilst we see it as one, not everyone sees it as fluent, as a holistic approach to the whole person. And we took the feedback from our people to see what they wanted. And some of it was really focused around the burnout. It was focused around the fatigue and also the balancing. So I'm not sure if you mentioned it while I was off call and disconnected there, but the juggle that was real of people trying to homeschool at the same time. So listening to some of that, and I think Holly and Chanel both touched on the flexibility and the impacts an environment can make. So whilst we looked at research, and we looked at a lot of research, it was the research that was the myth busting, but most importantly, it was listening to our people and finding out what we needed. So we actually reached out also to our industry and formed an alliance, which is Healthy Heads in Trucks and Sheds, for the transport and logistics industry. And we started sharing resources. So I don't know if other industries found the same, but rather than reinventing the wheel, it was critical not to do that because no one had time. It was so critical to reach out to our peers and, rather than be competitors, join as one and say, look, whilst we're big organisations, what's happening with the smaller organisations, because they can't afford the same resources. So let's all group together and talk about what they're asking for. We knew what we needed from our people, but share some of those insights. I think that was probably the biggest learning. But moving forward is remembering we're not out of this yet. And to continue to share our resources and learn from others and push that pride aside to say, okay, we don't always have the answers. Who does? That's a real critical piece to look into for any organisation. I also think any industry.
Great. And so we've heard, a collection of different surveys and assessments. I think the second piece is really around initiatives, trialing and testing things, right, and gathering feedback along the way. And then being a part of, different groups, talking to our leaders and literally just walking the corridors, right, in terms of really understanding what's going on with people right now and continuing those conversations moving forward. Might just ask one last question around presenteeism, Mark, around, the effect that presenteeism has and what potentially it might lead to over time in terms of burnout.
Absolutely. Thanks, Inga. Good question. Well, presenteeism has been linked to loss in productivity in the order of billions of dollars in Australia. We do know that the state of presenteeism can feed in on itself. So this is that state where you're physically present, but you're not mentally or perhaps emotionally checked in. So when you look at burnout, that sense of disconnect from your job kind of goes hand in hand with the concept of presenteeism, and linking in with one of the other questions, which is about, how do you, what initiatives would you put in place to support people working remotely or working flexibly? I think there's a big linkage there. And one of the things that we know really helps is to give people permission to set some boundaries. So psychosocial education, some self-awareness building, and providing people with a selection of tools to draw from, including techniques for and taking that permission to set boundaries so that you can look after yourself, prioritize your life to re-energize and understand those early signs when maybe I'm disconnecting a bit, maybe I'm physically there, but mentally I need some tools or techniques to switch off in a different way rather than sitting at my desk switched off. These are sort of holistic wellbeing journey-based interventions, but I think it starts with permission levels and then some really meaty techniques and tools that are led from the top. When leaders say, I'm switching off, I'm not available, feeling a bit tired, not feeling 100% present, that's a pretty powerful message and helps produce higher levels of trust amongst employees as well.
Great, thanks, Mark. So I think it's time to start wrapping up the session, and I wanted to leave everyone with a key sort of takeaway message that burnout is preventable. You can prevent and reverse burnout by changing how you can support and lead your people. If you're a wellbeing manager with limited resources to spend on reducing burnout, focus on these three things. Listen to what matters to your people, no matter how small and insignificant that may seem. We've heard that showing genuine leadership, so when something goes wrong, your people know that their manager and your organisation is there to support. And last but not least, give freedom through flexibility. Your people know their best life balance and you can help them achieve it. This, I feel, is going to bring out the best in your people. So I'd love to thank all the panelists that shared their insights today, and a big thank you to all of you for joining us. We'd ask you to take a moment to provide us with your feedback on the session. Just click on the link in the chat and we'll send you a free ticket to the festival to say a special thank you. And we look forward to seeing you all again at the Workplace Wellness Festival in June. Great, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Inga.
Thanks.
Pleasure.
A big thank you to Inga and all of our panelists today for sharing their valuable insights with us. What a great opportunity we've had to hear from the teams leading such large organizations and how they've been managing the well-being of their teams over the last 12 months. Particularly enjoyed hearing about, just getting back to basics, the basics of human connection and how powerful that can be. You'll hear more of these resources from the team at Bupa at our main event on the 22nd and 23rd of June. Don't miss out. It's going to be an action-packed program. Register now for you and your teams. And yeah, there'll be plenty more resources, insights, experiences to share and for you to take away to be inspired for leading your own teams. So a big thank you to all of you for joining us today and wishing you a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks from us. Bye-bye.